started noticing things I'd overlooked before. Abigail's phone was suddenly password protected, and she'd angle the screen away whenever I walked past. She'd started dressing differently too. Nothing dramatic, but her usual comfortable teacher's wardrobe had been supplemented with new, more fitted pieces. There were more late faculty meetings than ever before, and sometimes she'd come home smelling of unfamiliar cologne. I tried to ignore it, to trust in our decade of marriage, but Harry's words kept echoing in my mind. One night, after Abigail had fallen asleep, I did something I'd never thought I'd do. I checked her phone. The password was new, but I knew my wife. 1-2-2-4, our wedding date. The messages were right there, under a contact named M. Missing you already. Last night was incredible. Can't wait to see you again. My hands shook as I scrolled through weeks of messages, each one driving the knife deeper into my heart. There were photos too. Nothing explicit, but intimate enough to confirm my worst fears. The man in the pictures was tall, well-dressed, with the kind of looks that belonged on a magazine cover. His name was Mason Crawford, and according to his profile at First State Bank, he was a senior financial advisor. He was everything I wasn't: polished, sophisticated, probably never had sawdust in his hair or calluses on his hands. I put the phone back exactly where I'd found it, went to the bathroom, and threw up everything in my stomach. When I looked in the mirror, I hardly recognized myself. The man staring back at me looked old, defeated. I splashed cold water on my face and made a decision. I needed proof, real, undeniable proof, before I confronted her. The next day, I called Jacob Thompson, my lawyer friend from college. I need someone discreet, I told him, someone who can gather evidence without leaving a trace. Jacob didn't ask questions. That's why we'd stayed friends all these years. He gave me a name, Frank Delaney, private investigator. Frank was an ex-cop with 20 years of experience and a face that had seen too much. We met in his cramped office above the hardware store on Main Street. "Tell me everything," he said, and I did. 3 hours and 2 cups of terrible coffee later, we had a plan. For the next 2 weeks, Frank followed Abigail. He photographed her meetings with Mason at the Metropolitan, documented their lunch dates at fancy restaurants in the next town over. He even managed to get audio recordings of their conversations, sweet nothings that turned my stomach. Every photo, every recording was another nail in the coffin of my marriage. But it was what happened next that really threw me for a loop. One evening, as I was following one of Frank's leads, checking out a hotel where Abigail and Mason supposedly met, something hard hit the back of my head. The world went black. I woke up in St. Mary's Hospital with a concussion and a kind-faced nurse named Ava changing my eye. "V, you're lucky," she said, checking my vitals. "Someone found you in the parking lot. Could have been much worse." I tried to sit up, but the room spun violently. "Easy there," Ava said, gently pushing me back down. "You need rest." The police came to take my statement, but I couldn't tell them much. I hadn't seen my attacker, and I couldn't exactly explain why I was in that hotel parking lot in the first place. But I had my suspicions. Mason must have spotted me, or maybe he had someone watching out for him. During my 3 days in the hospital, Abigail visited exactly twice. Her concern seemed genuine enough, but there was something off about it. She asked too many questions about why I was at that hotel, her eyes sharp despite her worried expression. Meanwhile, Ava the nurse became a constant presence, her gentle competence and quiet humor helping me through the long hours. She was a single mother, she told me, working extra shifts to put her daughter through college. There was something real about her, something honest that made my heart ache when I thought about the lies waiting for me at home. When I was discharged, I had everything I needed: photos, recordings, text messages, and hotel receipts. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. Now I just had to decide what to do with it. The answer came in the form of an invitation. Abigail's parents were hosting their annual Labor Day barbecue, and the whole family would be there. It seemed fitting, somehow. The same place where we'd announced our engagement years ago would now be the stage for our marriage's final act. Frank advised against it. Handle it privately, he said. Less messy that way. But I was past caring about messy. I wanted the truth out there. Wanted everyone to see the real Abigail. Maybe it was petty, maybe it was cruel, but after everything that had happened, I felt entitled to a little cruelty. The day of the barbecue dawned bright and clear. Abigail was up early, preparing her famous potato salad, humming as she moved around the kitchen. I watched her from the doorway, wondering how she could act so normal when our whole life together had been reduced to a stack of damning evidence in my briefcase. She caught me looking and smiled. Everything okay, honey? You've been so quiet lately. I forced a smile back. Just thinking about today, I said. It's going to be quite an event. She had no idea how right I was. The Wilsons' backyard was already filled with familiar faces when we arrived. Abigail's parents had gone all out as usual. Strings of lights crisscrossed overhead, and the air was thick with the smell of barbecue. Paper lanterns swayed in the late summer breeze, casting shifting shadows across the lawn. I'd spent so many happy moments in this yard, but today it felt like a stage set for a tragedy. Ethan, Abigail, Sarah Wilson called out, hurrying over to hug her daughter. We were starting to worry you wouldn't make it. Behind her, Rober. T. Wilson manned the grill with the same military precision he'd learned in the Marines. He gave me a nod, which I returned automatically. I wondered how that nod would change once he knew the truth about his precious daughter. Abigail circulated through the crowd, the perfect hostess as always. I watched her laugh and chat, touching people's arms, leaning in to share secrets. Such a convincing performance. My briefcase felt heavy in my hand, loaded with the weight of truth. I waited until everyone had eaten, until the conversations had reached that lazy, content pitch that comes after a good meal. Abigail was sitting with her cousins, wine glass in hand, when I stood up and cleared my throat. Could I have everyone's attention, please? Conversations died down gradually, faces turning toward me expectantly. Some were smiling, probably expecting another one of my famous tipsy toasts. Abigail beamed at me, raising her wine glass slightly. The sunset painted everything in warm, golden tones, making the moment seem almost surreal. I have something I need to share with all of you. I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Especially with you, Robert and Sarah, since you've been like second parents to me. I opened my briefcase slowly, deliberately. For the past few months, your daughter, my wife, has been having an affair. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the crickets seemed to stop chirping. Abigail's wine glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the patio stones. The red wine spread like blood across the concrete. What are you talking about? Sarah whispered, but I was already pulling out the photos. I passed them around, my hand steady now. These were taken over the past 2 weeks. Each picture told its own story. Abigail and Mason entering hotels, sharing intimate meals, kissing in his car. There's more, I continued, pulling out printed copies of text messages. Would anyone like me to read these aloud? Ethan, stop this. Abigail's voice was shrill, panic-stricken. She stood up, knocking over her chair. This isn't. I can explain dash. Explain what, Abby? I asked, using the nickname she loved. Explain how you've been sleeping with Mason Crawford while I worked 60-hour weeks to build our future. Robert Wilson had gone very still, the spatula in his hand forgotten. Sarah was crying silently, looking at the photos with trembling hands. Abigail's cousins were whispering among themselves, and her sister Beth looked like she might be sick. Who's Mason Crawford? Robert asked, his voice deadly quiet. Show me. I handed him a particular photo. Mason and Abigail caught in an embrace outside the Metropolitan. Robert stared at it for a long moment, then turned to his daughter. Is this true? Abigail had started crying, mascara running down her cheeks. Daddy, please dash. Is this true? Robert's voice boomed across the yard, making several people jump. Abigail collapsed into a chair, nodding me. Cerebrally. Yes, she whispered. But it's not what you think, Dash. Then what is it? I cut in. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been lying to everyone in this yard. To your parents, to our friends, to me. I pulled out one final piece of paper. And here's the police report from when Mason's thugs attacked me in that hotel parking lot. Were you in on that too, Abby? Her head snapped up at that, genuine shock in her eyes. What? No. Ethan, I would never dash. Save it, I said, closing my briefcase with a snap. I've already filed for divorce. Jacob Thompson is handling everything. You'll be hearing from him soon. The party dissolved into chaos after that. Sarah was sobbing openly now, while Robert had walked to the far end of the yard, standing with his back to everyone. Abigail's sister Beth was trying to comfort her, but Abigail just sat there, staring at nothing. She looked small somehow, diminished. I left the evidence with Robert. He deserved to know exactly what his daughter had been up to. As I walked to my truck, I heard footsteps behind me. It was Beth. Ethan, wait. She caught up to me, her face troubled. What she did was wrong, terribly wrong, but she glanced back at her sister. Something's not right with her. She hasn't been herself for months, maybe even longer. I thought about the woman I'd married, the changes I'd noticed but ignored. That's not my problem anymore, Beth. My voice was harder than I meant it to be. She made her choices. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings and awkward encounters around town. Cedar Grove wasn't big enough for real anonymity, but people tried to give us space. I threw myself into work, spending long hours at the shop. The rhythmic sound of sawing and sanding was therapeutic, helping me forget for a few hours at a time. Abigail moved in with her parents. I heard through the grapevine that she'd taken a leave of absence from teaching. Beth's words kept coming back to me. Something's not right with her. But I pushed the thoughts away. I had my own healing to do. I started having dinner at O'Malley's most nights. Harry was a constant presence, solid and dependable. He never said, "I told you so," just kept me company and made sure I got home safe. One evening, I ran into Ava there, my nurse from the hospital. She was having dinner with her daughter, Emma, who was home from college for the weekend. Ethan, Ava's smile was warm, genuine. How's your head? Better, I said, managing a small smile in return. The outside, at least. She gave me a knowing look. And the inside? That's a work in progress. Emma, it turned out, was studying engineering at the University of Illinois. She was bright and funny, rolling her eyes good-naturedly at her mom's stories about the hospital. Watching them together, I felt an odd pang. This was what real family looked like. No pretense, no hidden agendas, just genuine affection and understanding. Join us, Ava offered, gesturing to their table. I hesitated, but Emma was already pulling out a chair. Mom's told me about you, she said. Said you make furniture? And just like that, I found myself drawn into their warm circle of conversation. As weeks turned into months, my dinners with Ava and Emma became more frequent. Sometimes Emma would be there, sometimes not, but Ava was a constant. She didn't push me to talk about Abigail, didn't offer platitudes about time healing all wounds. She just listened when I needed to talk and knew when I needed silence. Then came the day I heard about Mason Crawford's resignation from First State Bank. Rumors flew around town. Embezzlement, fraudulent accounts, inappropriate relationships with clients. The bank was keeping everything quiet, but the damage was done. Mason left town practically overnight, leaving chaos in his wake, including, I learned, several other married women he'd been seeing. I wish I could say I felt vindicated, but mostly I felt tired. Tired of the drama, tired of the whispers, tired of being the wronged husband in Cedar Grove's latest scandal. I wanted to move on, to find some way back to the man I used to be. One evening, as Ava and I walked back from O'Malley's, she stopped suddenly under a streetlight. "You know," she said, studying my face, "you're smiling more these days." I hadn't noticed, but she was right. "I guess I am," I replied. She reached up and touched my cheek gently. "Good," she said softly. "You have a nice smile." I caught her hand before she could pull it away. We stood there for a moment, suspended in the warm circle of lamplight. Then a car drove past, breaking the spell. Ava stepped back, but her fingers lingered in mine for a moment longer. "Good night, Ethan," she said and walked away. I watched her go, feeling something shift inside me, something that felt a lot like hope, but I knew better than to rush into anything. We both had our own healing to do first. The next morning, I woke to several missed calls and a text from Beth. "Ethan, please call me. It's about Abigail. She's not well." I found Beth waiting outside St. Mary's Hospital, her face drawn with worry. "She had some kind of breakdown," she explained as we walked through the sterile corridors. "Mom found her in the bathroom, surrounded by empty pill bottles." My stomach clenched. "Was it?" "No." Beth shook her head quickly. "They were all different medications, but none in lethal doses. The doctors think she was just trying to feel something." Abigail was in the psychiatric ward, a place so different from her usual surroundings that it made my head spin. She looked small in a hospital bed, her designer clothes replaced by a plain gown. Her eyes were vacant, staring at nothing. "The doctors say it's a severe depressive episode," Beth explained softly. "They think it's been building for a long time, maybe even years." I stood there, looking at the shell of the woman I demarried, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Anger was still there, but now tinged with pity. "What do they want to do?" "They're recommending inpatient treatment at Lakewood Psychiatric Center," Beth said. "It's a good facility, about an hour from here." I nodded, already reaching for my phone. "I'll call Jacob, make sure the insurance paperwork goes through." Beth touched my arm. "You don't have to do that, Ethan. This isn't your responsibility anymore." I looked at Abigail again, remembering the bright-eyed teacher who'd stolen my heart at a football game. "Maybe not," I said quietly. "But I'm doing it anyway." Life has a way of moving forward, whether you're ready or not. As autumn painted Cedar Grove in shades of red and gold, I found myself settling into new routines. Work at the shop was busier than ever. Holiday orders were starting to come in, and I'd hired 2 new apprentices. Teaching them reminded me why I'd fallen in love with woodworking in the first place. Ava and I were taking things slow, very slow. We'd have dinner, talk for hours, sometimes just sit in comfortable silence. She understood my hesitation, my need to be sure about every step. Emma would join us sometimes, filling the air with stories about college life and her plans for the future. Those evenings felt like glimpses of what family could be. Uncomplicated, warm, real. Then came the night that changed everything. I was working late at the shop, finishing up a custom dining table, when my phone buzzed. It was Dr. Peterson from Lakewood. "Mr. Mitchell, I apologize for calling so late, but we have a situation. Abigail has escaped." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Escaped? How?" "She manipulated one of our newer staff members," he explained. "We've alerted the police, but given your history, we wanted to warn you directly. She may try to contact you." I called Ava immediately. "Come to my place," she said without hesitation. "Emma's at school, and I don't want you alone tonight." I was pulling into her driveway 20 minutes later. We spent the evening watching old movies, trying to pretend everything was normal. But both of us kept glancing at our phones, jumping at every sound. Around midnight, we heard it, the distinct sound of someone trying to open the front door. Then came the voice. "Ethan, I know you're in there. I saw your truck." Abigail's voice was different, higher, almost childlike. Ava gripped my hand as footsteps circled the house. There was a crash of breaking glass from the kitchen. "Stay here," I whispered to Ava, reaching for my phone to call 911. But before I could dial, Abigail appeared in the doorway. She looked wild, her hospital gown covered by a stolen coat, her hair tangled and matted. In her hand was a kitchen knife, taken from God knows where. "There you are," she said, smiling in a way that made my blood run cold. "I've missed you, honey." "Abigail," I said carefully, positioning myself between her and Ava. "Eh, Oh, you need help. Let us call Dr. Peterson." She laughed, the sound brittle and wrong. "I don't need help. I need you to understand. Mason was a mistake. A terrible mistake. But now he's gone, and we can start over." "Put down the knife," Ava said softly, her nurse's training evident in her calm tone. "Let's talk about this." Abigail's eyes snapped to her, narrowing dangerously. She spat. "This is all your fault. You took him from me." She lunged forward, the knife glinting in the dim light. What happened next was a blur. I shoved Ava behind me, feeling a sharp pain as the knife caught my arm. There was a crash as we stumbled into a lamp, plunging the room into darkness. Somewhere in the chaos, I heard sirens approaching. Then the front door burst open, and suddenly the room was full of police officers. They subdued Abigail quickly, professionally. As they led her away, she was crying, calling my name over and over. It wasn't until they were gone that I realized I was bleeding. "Let me look at that," Ava said, already pulling out her first aid kit. Her hands were shaking slightly as she cleaned and bandaged the cut. "It's not deep," she assured me, "but you'll probably have a scar." I caught her hands in mine. "I'm sorry," I said, "for bringing all this chaos into your life." She looked at me for a long moment, then leaned forward and kissed me. It was gentle, questioning, full of promise. "Life is chaos," she said when we pulled apart. "What matters is who you face it with." The aftermath was quieter than I expected. Abigail was committed to a high-security facility in Chicago. The doctors diagnosed her with several mental health conditions that had gone untreated for years. Beth kept me updated on her progress, and slowly, very slowly, she began to improve. Months passed, then a year. The scar on my arm faded to a thin white line. The shop flourished, and I took on more apprentices. Ava and I moved in together, turning her small house into a home filled with custom furniture and laughter. Emma graduated college and took a job in Chicago, but she came home often, filling us in on her latest adventures. Then one day, a letter arrived from Abigail. It was different from her previous attempts at contact. No declarations of love, no desperate pleas. Just a simple, heartfelt apology. She was doing better, she wrote. The medications were helping, and she was finally starting to understand herself. She didn't expect forgiveness, but she wanted me to know she was sorry for everything. I showed the letter to Ava that evening as we sat on our porch swing. The autumn air was crisp, and leaves danced across the lawn. "Are you going to write back?" she asked. I thought about it, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "No," I said finally. "Some chapters need to stay closed." She nodded, understanding as always, and nestled closer. Life in Cedar Grove goes on. People still gossip, but the story of Ethan and Abigail has faded in a local legend, replaced by newer dramas. The oak tree in front of my old house on Maple Street still stands, its leaves turning gold in the autumn light. Sometimes I drive past and remember the life I had there, the dreams I'd built. But then I go home to Ava, to our life together, and I know that sometimes the best things in life come after everything falls apart. Because that's the thing about small towns and second chances. They teach you that every ending is just another beginning in disguise. You just have to be brave enough to turn the page.